all for coming out tonight. It's really encouraging to have people come out to participate in the conversation on how we can have concrete action on climate change. We wanted to bring together people with a long history in the environmental movement and from political office to learn from our past mistakes and our successes. We want to look for guidance for effective and efficient climate change campaigns in the future. My name is Megan Burnside and I will be the host for the evening. Now our first panelist probably does not need much introduction here, but Sean Murphy was MP for Charlottetown for 10 years. He was very active on climate change during that time. He was the chair of the Public Accounts Committee and served as parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans with special emphasis on the Oceans Action Plan during the Paul Martin government. Sean has and continues to be a supporter and advisor for many arts and non-for-profits here in Charlottetown. Please welcome Sean.
Okay, do you want to move on? Thanks. Okay, first of all, as I think everyone here knows, environment is a shared jurisdiction, federally and provincially. This, and a lot of times, is used as a scapegoat for politicians to do nothing. Generally speaking, the public, in my opinion, has a very deep and constant concern, but it's not a front of mind issue. In the 4 elections that I fought, it didn't seem to drive votes, although people were deeply, deeply concerned. I shouldn't say that. We did fight one specific election on the carbon tax in 08. People generally they're concerned, how can I personally make a difference? And it is very much, from my experience, event driven. If we have fish kills, people become very concerned about the environmental state of our rivers. If we don't have fish kills, it sort of disappears. The dealing with the movement itself, if you can move on to the next slide. My experience with the environmental groups, and some people won't agree with me, but I'll say these things anyway. Generally speaking, they weren't always well organized. The limited, and I'm talking very limited public funding that was available was all disappeared. In my opinion, in many times they were sometimes too much focused on protest rather than attempting to mobilize public opinion and electoral support. A mainstream focus was sometimes lacking, and it has the additional challenge in that from a federal context, we're dealing with 4 progressive parties, the Liberals, the New Democratic Party, the Greens, and the Bloc Québécois, so that makes it indeed challenging. We can move on. On public opinion, from my 10.5 years experience, the majority of Canadians, and certainly the overwhelming majority of people that live in this district, want greater environmental protection. They view climate change as a very serious threat to society. Most people, in my opinion again, view themselves as environmentalists. And the people in this room would be surprised at the level of support that is in the boardrooms and the senior executive offices within Canadian businesses. The envelope is definitely moving. Having said that, again, I believe public opinion is latent. It has to be galvanized. It has to be marshaled. And at present, there's a very deep policy vacuum. There's an ideological divide, certainly at the federal level, between the government in power and the other parties. Now, dealing with the subject here tonight, what motivates politicians? From my experience, the big motivator is fear. Politicians are specifically fearful of public opinion. What out there, who out there, what group out there, what organization moves votes? Having said that, and that is what I'm stating or I'm advocating, that the environmental movement has to have more focus on political action and in some occasions less on protests. We have to search for a pragmatic process. It will sometimes be incremental. There's not going to be that eureka moment. And people that are involved in the environmental movement have to be involved in the political process and develop a very clear, well-organized, strategic political strategy. We've seen a situation last week in the States where the National Rifle Association, and I'm sure everyone in this room does not like or support the National Rifle Association, but they were effective from a political strategic point of view in having 90% of the senators in the United States defeat that bill, which I believe the majority of senators wanted to vote for, and the majority of Americans wanted to vote for. But that bill was defeated because you had a very clearly well-organized political organization, not a party, against them. Politicians, and we've seen this again and again, become paralyzed because of fear of retribution. We've got this ridiculous debate going on in Ottawa now where the federal Conservatives are accusing the NDP of advocating a $33 billion job-destroying carbon tax. Well, it sounds great, but there's a problem with it. It's not true. The NDP have never said that in their lives. What they're advocating is a cap-and-trade system, exactly the same as the Conservatives advocated in the 06 and 08 election. But if the Conservatives feel if they repeat it over and over again, people might believe it's true. But that's what's happening, and because of the fear, you have politicians doing nothing. And I've gone through that, of course, in the 08 election. Going back to, I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to speak quick. If you can move on, next one. Back to climate change. I'm not going to get into the facts. You people all know them, and there's another panel going on tonight. The problem is very clear. It's also a problem of intergenerational inequity, where my generation has kicked the can down the road to be dealt with by generations to come. It's certainly an issue of equity between the developed and less developed countries of this world. There's no question we have to become a less carbon-consuming society, and the public wants action. We can move on. The strategies available to anyone in the public, whether it's you're involved in an organized group or yourself, you have public education. Certainly that is I think where everything starts, public opinion, public engagement, public advocacy, protest, and of course ending with civil disobedience, which I certainly don't recommend. The tools available to government, somewhat similar to a certain extent to public education. There's incentives, whether they be direct financial incentives, tax incentives. There's regulations. Again, if you're dealing specifically with the climate change issue, there's cap and trade, there's regulations, and of course there is the carbon tax. I'm going to change focus here and make a suggestion. We can move on to the next one. In my opinion, and I'm going to throw this out here tonight, in my opinion, Prince Edward Island has a tremendous opportunity to be a real leader in this issue. We don't have any carbon extraction or producing industries. We certainly have absolutely no, or very limited, energy security. We're not near the United States border. I did a quick review of the information. We spend as a society, Prince Edward Islanders, in excess of $500 million in carbon-based fuels. That's mainly diesel, gas, and fuel. That, ladies and gentlemen, is $1.5 million a day that leaves this province. Be a small percentage retained by the dealers, but it goes mainly to the urban company, and the bulk of that would actually go on to Algeria or Venezuela. That is, on average, $3,600 for every man, woman, and child who lives in this province. And again, a small part stays in the island. I think we should sometimes refocus the issue, not exclusively, but I think we should have a deep discussion as to, if we can move on, the economics of it. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for economic development and green jobs. If we can move on. I think we should really, seriously, without fear of retribution or tax, discuss a carbon tax. It's in effect in British Columbia, Quebec, Alberta. They all come at it differently. I personally support the British Columbia model. We're not going to see any federal leadership in the next 24 months. We know that. If you read what all the articles that come out from the business, the Canadian Association of Chief Executives, biggest organization in Canada. They are clearly on record of supporting a carbon tax. Most of the major oil companies are. The majority of Canadians, every person that, not every person, but the vast majority of people that have studied this issue, and the most effective way for change is to send market signals. Again, it would have to be carefully phased in. There has to be protections for people that are most vulnerable. Move on. Just, and I'm not going to get into the specifics, it's way too complicated. I've done that before in my life. And the rate would have to be determined. There would have to be protections for low-income people, but a good sum, if not a majority of the sums, would have to be very specifically directed to conservation efforts. That, in my opinion, would create thousands of green jobs in this province. And then secondly, if the carbon tax were successful in seeing let's say, just pick it out of the air, a 10% reduction in our use of carbon-based fuels, that would result in a savings of $50 million for the people of this province. And we all know what would happen with that $50 million. It would be spent. And that, in turn, to the multiplier effect, would have a significant economic impact in this province. That money, every cent of it, would stay in this province. So again, I think we have to refocus the discussion. This discussion has taken place in all other provinces. It will take place very seriously at the federal level. It will take place eventually. And I know everyone here is frustrated by the slowness of what the Obama administration is going, but it will take place in the United States. But however, it does require public dialogue. I congratulate the organizers of this event. Public opinion has to be marshaled. Clear strategies have to be developed. This country very, very dearly needs a national energy strategy. And it also needs, in whatever manner you come about it, it does need market signals being sent out on the use of carbon. And the discussion that's taking place here tonight has to continue. So I've tried to encapsulate my thinking in less than 10 minutes, or 10 minutes and less, and I want to again thank everyone for coming and thank the organizers of this event. Thank you.
His political career spanned from 1988 to 2009 and included 5 successful elections. Many will remember Mr. Casey leaving the Conservative caucus to serve as an independent. Mr. Casey lives in Amherst, where he provides advice and direction to several businesses and community organizations. He is married to Rosemary, and they have 3 grown children, Michael, Holly, and Allison, and 2 grandchildren, Willow and Jasper. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Casey.
I'm just going to move this and
Bring it up a little higher. Thank you very much, Megan. And I was asked to speak on communication with government, and I may be the last person that should be answering that question, because I had 8 leaders, and I don't think any of them would say I communicated with them very well over my career. But anyway, I have some thoughts on the issue, and I think we're in a unique position in Atlantic Canada to try to get a focus on some of these issues. And I hope I can put some ideas in your head tonight, and maybe we can carry it a little further. When you think of communicating with government, you think of contacting your member of parliament and making presentations at committees and things. But I don't think those work very well anymore, because politics, especially in Ottawa, is so partisan that there's just no flexibility to accept new ideas. It's one thing to communicate with government, but it's something else for them to get the message. And communications doesn't always get the message to politicians. But I'm going to talk just quickly tonight about the power of the people, which I truly believe in. I'm going to talk about mobilizing the power of the people and then finding a champion. Anyway, first of all, I believe that we have to mobilize people to make change. The presentations to committees and members of parliament aren't enough. Government only listens when enough people speak up and they get angry and they know what they're talking about. And I want to give you 3 examples that I thought were really neat of the power of the people just last week. I'm sure some of you, maybe all of you, have heard about Rehtaeh Parsons, a young woman in Halifax who committed suicide after she was raped and bullied on the internet. And the school board said, well, really, there's nothing we can do because there's a police investigation. The RCMP or the police said, well, there's nothing we can do because the Crown Prosecutor says there's not enough evidence to lay charges. The politicians said, well, we would not interfere with the police. Give them 3 or 4 days of pressure on the internet, social network, and the media, and the power of the people, and they all change their position. In fact, tomorrow, the Premier of Nova Scotia is meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada to demand a new law. Now, this is the same man that said just a few days before that, we can't do anything. The school board is being investigated now by an outside source to see if they handled it right, and the police have reopened the investigation, and the Crown Prosecutor suddenly says there's new evidence. But that's the power of the people. Another interesting one that I really enjoyed was the president of the Royal Bank. The Royal Bank used a federal program to bring in immigrants to train them by Canadian employees so they could go back to India or wherever and take those jobs with them. And up until now, the Royal Bank and big organizations have not had to be accountable to anybody. But in this case, the power of the people swung into action, internet, social networking, press, and pretty soon, you see the president of the Royal Bank on CBC television looked like he'd been hit by a truck and saying, apologize for abusing the system. He's never had to be accountable before. But the power of the people turned the Royal Bank 180 degrees, the same as they did the authorities in Halifax. And the last one, just a quick one, it's in my own area. The government of Nova Scotia was planning to close somewhere between 6 and 12 schools in small communities in Nova Scotia. They were adamant. There was no backing up. There was no reconsideration until the power of the people. They got together, they got on the internet, they got in social networking, they got the media together, and they raised a campaign so that even after they announced they were closing some of the schools, they announced that, no, I guess we're not going to do that after all. We're going to review the whole process. But again, if you give the people an identifiable cause, something they can get their hands around and their mind around, they will rise to the occasion. We have to mobilize the people, and we have to use terms that we all understand. Like, I've often heard this expression, well, every Canadian emits 16 tons of CO2 emissions per year. What's a ton of CO2 emissions? Is that a Prius? Is that a Toyota? Or what is that? Anyway, I could never understand it, but it's a scientific term. It isn't even a term that we know of. So it's hard to understand what a ton of emissions is. And many of the things about the environment are intangible and hard to understand, but that's one that I really don't understand. And particulates and parts per million, it's hard to understand those. You can understand the young woman who suffered in Halifax. You can understand the RBC hiring foreign immigrants, but what is so many parts per million particulates? You know what I mean? It's hard to understand. We have to find something we can really talk about. And I think in Atlantic Canada we have that, and that's rising sea levels. It has a visual effect, significant impact, and it's predictable. Just a few years ago, they were talking about sea levels rising so many centimeters in 100 years and 150 years. Not too tangible for us. Not too tangible for me anyway, 100 years from now. But now they're talking. There was a report released last week that said that sea levels in the Bay of Fundy, and probably here too, are going to rise over 2 feet in 42 years. I can understand 42 years. I bought a car 42 years ago. I still haven't. You know, that's something I can understand. And 2 feet, I can understand. 2.2 feet is a lot. That's a lot more than anybody predicted. The United Nations is now predicting that sea levels are going to rise at 60% higher rate than they thought just a few years ago. So I think that this is something tangible if we use it right. And actually, I was at Timothy's today for a chat with some other members of the panel and some of the audience, and we were talking, and it really struck me. A good idea would be if we could challenge all the engineering students in Atlantic Canada to figure out how far the water is going to come up in 42 years and put stakes in the ground all over Atlantic Canada so people can see what's really going to happen within our lifetime. My grandson, who Megan mentioned, will be 44 years old, and sea levels will be at least 2.2 feet higher, maybe a lot higher. They're talking a meter in 80 years. This is a lot of water. This is a lot of Charlottetown. This is a lot of Prince Edward Island is going to be affected by this. But maybe if the engineering students could put stakes in the ground all over Nova Scotia, because there's a whack of Nova Scotia going to be affected, and New Brunswick as well, but PEI is certainly the most vulnerable of any province. Maybe this is an idea, it's tangible, we can see it, it's visual, you have a time frame. Maybe the students could do that. But again, that's just one idea. But the point is, to get the attention of politicians, you have to mobilize the people. To mobilize the people, you have to put it in terms they can understand and get their head around. This idea of the stakes in the ground is just one. I'm sure you can all have other good ideas. But I think it's one, and perhaps we should explore that. The last thing I wanted to talk about was a champion. I was in the caucus when the government passed, I was in the Conservative caucus when the government passed the Acid Rain Treaty. And that was the result of one persistent member of Parliament by the name of Stan Darling. You remember Stan Darling? Stan Darling was the member from Muskoka, a wonderful place in Ontario, beautiful vacation land, pristine. And he saw his trees going brown, he saw his lakes being polluted, he saw his fish dying. And every single week he came to Parliament, every single week he took his life in his hands and he hammered Prime Minister Brian Mulroney until Brian Mulroney couldn't do anything more but go down and see President Reagan. And I mean, this is the short version, but that really had an impact. That one person, that one champion on acid rain had an awful lot to do with the Acid Rain Treaty that was passed in 1991. But I saw that man stand up every week and make his point. Anyway, in closing, I just want to say, to get the attention of government, we have to have tangible issues that people can get their head around. We have to use the media, the social network, and the internet to mobilize the people and get them together. And if we can, we need to find a tireless champion or two. And when I was listening to Sean's remarks, I kind of thought that you almost think that we got together on these remarks because they're so much alike. And he talked about fear. And it was fear that turned the Royal Bank around, fear of loss of business. It was fear in Nova Scotia about Rehtaeh Parsons, fear that people will push back on the politicians. And it was the same thing with the schools. So Sean is really right. Fear is the most motivating feature for our politicians, and that has got to be part of the cause. But again, we have to mobilize the power of the people, because the power of the people works. Thank you.
Our final panelist is Pam Cooley. Pam, a native Haligonian, has always been a change agent, weaving together her business and civic life to make the world a better place. Known as a practical visionary, she has launched and helped launch many successful social entrepreneurial endeavors. Pam is the founder of Choose Ethical Ventures, a Vancouver-based consulting and facilitation services company that has been in operation since 1996. Ms. Cooley specializes in fostering collaboration and facilitation of controversial, multi-stakeholder challenges. Her ethical approach to solving complex and controversial problems has positioned a number of her clients as the proud recipients and nominees for Vancouver's Ethics in Action Awards. Pam co-founded the first multi-vehicle car share service in Atlantic Canada in December of 2008. Within a year, CarShare Atlantic was awarded Gold New Business of the Year for 2010 by the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and Pam was named Woman of Excellence by the Canadian Progress Club for Entrepreneurship. She has been featured in several books and was recently featured as an eco-innovator in the book Eco-Innovators, Sustainability in Atlantic Canada, for her work in developing the CarShare program in Halifax. She thrives on bringing ethics and values to wherever she goes. She has made a difference. Please join me in welcoming Pam.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you for being here. And thank you to Christina and Micah and Alex for hosting us last night. Very nice dinner and chat. And thank you for coming. I'm always kind of feeling strange when people ask me my thoughts, but hopefully I'll have something to give you tonight that might be of some value too. So, creating change, particularly trying to change government policy, is difficult anyway, and regarding climate change, it's even more difficult, I find. And but a very noble thing to do. And so I commend all of you who are doing that on any kind of level that you are, whether it's on the ground doing your community gardens and just taking over land, or whether you're working on policy level. So there's some points that I want to help in perhaps trying to create climate change policy. And the first point that I have is don't call it climate change policy. It's not something that people are relating to, and we're talking about the social, on-the-ground community kind of approach. It's not something that everybody wants to be associated with. But however, what makes sense is what people will get involved with. And so if we do what makes sense, then and work for something, working towards something rather than against something, then it works. So even if you don't believe in climate change, or if you don't believe that climate change is happening, doing what makes sense and what works will actually get people involved to help change things. So for instance, if we have, we know that sea level is rising, then why don't we do something about that? So we go by issues. So sea level is rising. How many people in PEI, if we actually put it in a way that it means something to them and that they'll be affected by, then, and do something pragmatic about it, then we can get people on board. We only have certain things that we can work with. On this planet, we have, we mine it, we grow it, we fish it, we drink it, and we breathe it. That's all we have. That's all we have to work with. And if we do those things, if we look at those things, and we take care of those things, and we do it in intelligent ways, then
if we have data as well. See, data also calms the water in a sense. So everybody gets very, very emotional about everything that they want to say, but if you have data, you've got the science, and you've got the business case, then you can enroll people in it. And so the idea is to make sure that you're inspiring people to bring what works. And again, data is our friend, and science is our friend, and we have to make sure that we protect the science and the people who do the science in order to give us the data in order to make our arguments. And this is something that actually is being eroded away right now with the federal government that we have in place. The next point that I have is that we always try and protest and make somebody an enemy rather than actually seeing everybody as a potential ally. And my experience is that if actually you get to know the people who are sort of the enemy, then, and this is not in every case, so they're an ally until they're not. Okay, so I always assume that people are allies until I actually get evidence that they're not an ally, and then we work toward actually exposing them for the values that they have. These are some of the things that work for me. The last thing that I want to say is vote with your dollars. I believe that every time we pay for something, we are actually voting for something. And that's why I started Choose Ethical Ventures. So if we find work and support and finance the private sector and not see them as an enemy, then we can actually secure what I call the green economy. Some people were talking about that tonight. The green economy, the green industry, Atlantic Canada can be a leader in the green economy. We have an ocean economy, we have agriculture, we have a lot of things, we have wind, we have waves, we have all kinds of things that we can do in order to be a leader in the green economy. The rural areas in all of the Atlantic provinces are dying because we don't have the industries that have historically given us economy. We can turn that all around. We have such a small area that we can work with that it can turn this all around. We can create jobs and be a leader in all of this. You have to create vision. I believe that most of us in the environmental movement have always protested against something rather than actually have a vision towards something. And this is what I want to be involved with. And I've been accused of selling out because I'm a business. And I think that business is actually allies. Mostly, if we invest in the small and medium-sized pioneers that are doing such hard work right now in our Atlantic provinces and invest in those and get our governments to invest in those and us, then we can actually make a difference in the Atlantic province. We were talking about PEI being a small microcosm of something that we can actually be a model for the future and be a model for other places. We can do that. We can do that in Atlantic provinces. So we have to follow the money. The green economy can have positive outcomes. We can renew the rural areas. We can create new industry that can actually be used locally as well as export. And we can have a solid economy in the future. But we're always the kind of like, it's like change is very difficult. But if we have inspiring leaders, in the Maritimes I find that it's like it's no first, right? And so it's always no, 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 no. But so I have this campaign going. And you know, when you're talking to somebody about something innovative, and you can see that no, and it's starting in the stomach, and you can see it coming up, and you can see it coming up, and so just before it gets to the esophagus, you go, now, before you say no, say maybe. And then it opens up a whole new world of possibility. The other thing is that I think in the Atlantic provinces, in my experience, being all over the world and coming back here is that we're so far behind here. Like we're about 20 years behind where other people are in other places. We're so far behind that we're ahead. We don't have to make the same mistakes that a lot of people have made over the last 20 years. There's technology, there's experience that we can gain from other places that actually can make a difference for us. And we don't have to make the same mistakes. So for instance, in Germany, did you know that buildings are the most energy suckers that we have? They use up more energy than anything else. In Germany, all the buildings that are going to be made are retrofitted to actually be energy generators rather than energy suckers. I mean, we can do that. We have the technology. There's lots of things out there that we can learn from, and we don't have to make the same mistakes that a lot of other people have made over the last 20 years. So, if we do all of these things, it's not necessarily climate change policy, but what it does is it has a positive effect that actually has an environmental effect. And so a lot of people have been put off the language around environmentalists, the language around climate change. I'm a pragmatist. Atlantic provinces people are all pragmatists. I think if we look at the issues and bring people in to what they care about, then we can make a difference. So we need to be bold, and we're talking about champions. I think all of you are champions in your own ways. It can be the community garden, you can get the neighborhood together, it can be anything, anybody at any age, at any time, in any level of income that you make can make a difference, and I think that's the momentum that we can create here in the Atlantic provinces. We can be a model here. Thank you very much.
I would like to call up Todd McLean now to provide a summation for tonight's proceedings. Todd is a local environmental hero that has been working on a wonderful project called Global Chorus, a 365-person anthology of worldwide concern and enduring hope with contributors from across the globe.
I don't know if I'm an environmental hero, but thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, what an insightful evening this has been for Getting Action on Climate Change on Earth Day 2013. In summation of the evening, we've heard from Sean Murphy in his statements as a former MP about climate change and how it needs to become more of a front-of-mind issue. NGOs needed to become more better organized with a mainstream focus. Intergenerational equity and how PEI can be a leader in economic development and green jobs along with the carbon tax. We've heard from Bill Casey in his engaging talk about the power of the people and about the public impact of the reality of rising sea levels and the ways of mobilizing the people on the environment. We've heard from Stephen Hazel in his well-delivered Skype address on the, it was well-delivered, on the past concrete successes of the environmental movement, its current shortcomings on climate change campaigning and the need to emphasize community-based social marketing with campaigning. And from Pam Cooley and her fueling words on doing what makes sense and what works and moving the public on environmental issues by boiling them down to their impacting core and addressing them in pragmatic ways for the public, voting with our dollars, and the before you say no, say maybe approach. I love that. And how we're actually so far behind in Atlantic Canada that we're actually ahead in our ability to skip steps towards sustainability. It's inspiring. This is an ominous task ahead of us for the entire world and obviously for our country. Canada knows, and everyone all over the world who is environmentally conscious and is looking at Canada knows how much environmental ground we need to recover in the coming years after the short-sighted decimation that has taken place in recent years. The climb to our nation's summit of sustainability has been made drastically more steep. But there's one very important thing that I've learned in the work I've been doing over the past several years. I've been compiling this environmental anthology, asking people all over the world, just flat out, the big question: do you think that humanity can get through the environmental crisis that is facing us? If so, how? Do we have hope? And yes, of course, the responses are grave, definitely ominous, and I've received nearly 200 responses thus far. But almost unbelievably, the most promise-filled responses are coming from the ones who know the most about the ins and outs of our planet's trajectory. People like Jane Goodall, Bill McKibben, Paul Hawken, Alexander Cousteau, David Orr, R.K. Pachuri, the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and many more. Their answers, they're varying, they are stating words of massive concern, and yet threaded throughout is a shining, indomitable, unyielding spirit of hope for humanity and a firm knowingness that we can succeed in overcoming our environmental challenges. This hope is a mighty power, and it can be widespread, harnessed, and acted upon. And if we do this, we will unquestionably prevail. I firmly believe this. And a lot of the contributors to this anthology do as well. The words I've collected for the anthology thus far, it's all spoken one clear thing to me, and that is that the right words said at the right time can have the force of a mighty river, and moreover, the right words said at the right time by the right people can wash away mountains of injustice, leaving only the seeds for a better world planted in their path. Now, I'm going to leave you on one final note here on this Earth Day evening, if I may. And we've all heard so many stats, and I just heard one a couple days ago, and it's so easy to just shut off your mind when you hear these statistics because they can be mind-numbing. But this is about the value of a plastic bottle and how much energy is invested into it and how much energy can be saved through the proper treatment of it. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, by the way, but just hear me out. Recycling just one plastic bottle saves enough energy to power a 60-watt light bulb for 6 hours. This clearly shows the interconnectivity with environmentally friendly actions. Virtually every earth-friendly action we do is a gift that just keeps on giving to the planet in ways that we so often don't even know about. I'm saying this as Earth Day 2013 comes to an end because it is all too easy to get bogged down in the age-old and uselessly outdated thinking of, you know what, this one thing I'm doing, it's not going to matter at all. It's just completely useless to think that because there are millions of positive snowball effects taking place all over this floating orb in space right now, especially on Earth Day. If you just think of the you know, the earth conscious activities that people are doing, and they're all having this continuous snowball effect, all these singular actions. And so as awareness spreads, this number is only increasing. And so remember all these effective, rippling outcomes that come about from any positive thing you do for this earth. And in this way, as I wish you a happy Earth Day 2013, I remind you it is truly a very exciting time to live in this regard. Massive thanks to the organizers of this evening, Megan Burnside and Jocelyn Plourde, and an unnamed woman who makes delicious chocolate chip cookies. She prefers to be unnamed, standing in the back of the room. What a wonderful evening, and thanks again to this evening's presenters, Sean Murphy, Bill Casey, Stephen Hazel, and Pam Cooley. And now I invite Megan to present gifts to the presenters. Thank you.
So I'd like to present a very special gift certificate for Todd's Global Course as soon as it's off the press, to thank each of the panelists tonight for sharing their views. So thanks again.